The night was unusually still, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest, heavy and accusing. Streetlights flickered like faulty heartbeat monitors, and shadows stretched across the pavement as if the world itself were holding its breath. Somewhere down the road, a faint siren wailed. Not an emergency, just enough to make your pulse quicken. You knew something was coming, something that would shatter the fragile calm of ordinary life. She hadn't expected it. Nobody ever does. A knock at the door, abrupt and insistent, roused her from the warmth of a quiet evening. Through the peephole, the uniformed figures stared back. Authority incarnate, masks of civility. Fake badges glinted under the dim light, polished and menacing. They carried the power to make her freeze, to bend her reality into a nightmare. Yet, there was something off, an uncanny precision in their movements, a threat that didn't belong in a peaceful neighborhood. She opened the door, heart hammering. And in a moment so quick, so surreal, the world snapped sideways. Hands collided with her frame, striking with the certainty of practiced brutality. Pain exploded, hot and immediate, forcing her to the floor. Outside, the neighborhood remained silent, oblivious to the storm that had descended. Neighbors slept behind locked doors, unaware that law and justice were being twisted into something unrecognizable right on their street. Inside, fear and fury collided. Every instinct screamed to fight, to survive, to protect, but the odds seemed insurmountable. These weren't just intruders. These weren't ordinary criminals. They had a face of authority, a veneer of legitimacy, and an intent that chilled the blood. One wrong move, and everything could be lost. And yet, a silent promise lingered in the air. Someone would answer this violation, someone would make the injustice right. The darkness seemed to lean closer, and in that suffocating moment, the world contracted to a single question. How far would justice stretch when power is weaponized against the powerless? Outside, the fake officers lingered, unaware that the story they had stumbled into was far beyond their control. Every heartbeat echoed a countdown, every breath a warning. And then it happened. The room shifted, tension rippling through the air like an electric storm. The intruders had underestimated the storm they had awakened. There was a presence that filled the space, silent, precise, unrelenting. A force ready to rewrite the rules of what was permissible, to restore balance where it had been violently erased. The night was no longer quiet. The pretense of authority was about to be shattered, and nothing would ever feel safe again. Hit subscribe, watch till the end. The morning after the night of terror began quietly, almost deceptively. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting the room with stripes of gold and shadow. She moved slowly, wincing at the memory of the previous evening, each step a reminder that safety is fragile, a luxury not guaranteed. Around her, the home was orderly, every detail a reflection of careful planning, a haven meticulously built to shield against a world that often seemed indifferent or hostile. Her husband, a man whose presence carried the discipline of a Navy SEAL, had returned home late last night, just as the chaos erupted. He was a figure forged in extremes, trained to read threats before they arrived, to act with precision when others faltered. Yet even he had been taken aback by the audacity of the intruders, figures cloaked in false authority, who wielded the law like a weapon rather than a shield. Outside, the neighborhood seemed ordinary, almost serene. Lawns were trimmed, fences painted, mailboxes uniform. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. There was a subtle current of exclusion, an unspoken hierarchy enforced by rules that targeted those who didn't fit the expected mold. She had felt it before, small indignities and sideways glances, the casual dismissals that accumulate into a weight heavy enough to bend the spine. It was this undercurrent that made the night's invasion more than an isolated act of violence. It was an echo of systemic bias, a reminder of the fragility of justice in spaces that claimed fairness yet practiced exclusion. She moved through her home, touching the surfaces as if to reaffirm reality. Each room was a testament to resilience, to the lives they had built despite subtle and persistent obstacles. Photos lined the walls, capturing moments of triumph and love, smiles frozen in time, evidence that the world they wanted to inhabit existed somewhere beyond the reach of fear. And yet, The shadow of the previous night lingered, refusing to be banished by sunlight. The questions it raised hung in the air. How could authority be so easily corrupted? How could violence masquerade as legitimacy? And more pressing still, what would it take to confront the injustice and ensure it never happened again? The stage was set. The players were in position. And the storm, though invisible now, was only just beginning to gather strength. The days that followed were a tense blur. Every sound outside the house, footsteps on the pavement, the distant hum of engines, felt amplified, suspicious, charged with menace. She moved cautiously, each glance over her shoulder a reflex. The intrusion had left more than bruises. It had fractured the sense of safety she had taken for granted. And yet, it also awakened a simmering resolve, a determination that the violation would not go unanswered. Their neighbors watched from behind carefully drawn curtains, indifferent or unwilling to intervene. Some carried the quiet biases that had shaped the neighborhood for years, the subtle segregation that allowed authority to target those who didn't conform. The HOA, once an innocuous organization of community guidelines, had shown its teeth, an institution that wielded power unevenly, punishing without cause, enforcing rules selectively, and often masking prejudice as regulation. Investigations began quietly at first. Surveillance footage, online records, and witness accounts painted a chilling picture. Fake officers exploiting the trust of a community that assumed uniforms meant protection. Every discovery revealed a network of audacity and impunity. Every proof of wrongdoing seemed to amplify the stakes, heightening the sense that what had happened wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of systemic neglect and injustice. Her husband's presence became a silent force in the house. Every routine task, every movement, was marked by precision and vigilance. He inspected the locks, mapped the entrances, and strategized contingencies with the kind of calm that only years of extreme training could produce. And yet, the weight of knowing that these men had entered their home, chosen her as a target because of her identity and the implicit biases of the neighborhood, pressed heavily. It was a mix of fury and disbelief, the knowledge that law could be manipulated to harm, that power could be exercised without accountability. As the tension mounted, the neighborhood itself seemed to shift. Subtle confrontations, veiled threats, and unexplained encounters began to hint at a brewing reckoning. Every day added pressure. Every glance carried a story untold. The injustice was no longer a singular event. It was a pulse running beneath the streets, a silent drumbeat demanding acknowledgement. And somewhere in the growing storm, the line between fear and action blurred. The intruders had assumed dominance, but they had underestimated the resilience and resolve of those who refused to be silenced. What they saw as compliance was, in fact, the quiet gathering of strength. And the world was about to witness the consequences of underestimating a force disciplined, righteous, and unwilling to let injustice stand. The night air was thick with anticipation, every shadow a potential threat. Inside the home, silence had taken on a weight of its own, almost suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of electricity and the steady rhythm of her husband's breathing. Every muscle in his body was coiled, a living instrument of precision, every sense alert to the faintest disturbance. Outside, the fake officers moved with calculated confidence, unaware that the storm they had unleashed was about to consume them. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally, each second a taut wire ready to snap. The intruders had expected compliance, the quiet fear of someone who had been targeted, isolated, and intimidated. They had miscalculated. In undercurrents of controlled fury, the home became a stage for confrontation, a theater of justice awaiting its moment. Their audacity, born from assumed authority and systemic indifference, was about to meet the force they had never anticipated. The first motion came swiftly. A door creaked under a silent push. Then, in a blur of disciplined movement, her husband intercepted the intruders with the precision of someone who had trained for moments far deadlier than this. Hands, fists, and momentum collided. Each strike was deliberate, aimed to neutralize without hesitation. The intruder's shock was evident, the illusion of control shattered in an instant. Every corner of the room echoed with the clash of authority upended. The fake badges, once symbols of intimidation, were now symbols of vulnerability, slipping from hands as the men realized the mistake they had made. Their confidence eroded, replaced by fear as the true extent of the consequences unfolded in real time. Outside, the neighborhood remained oblivious, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge, the upheaval. But the storm inside was undeniable. Each calculated movement, each defensive strike, became a symphony of retribution, a stark reversal of power. The balance that had been violently disrupted was now being restored, methodically, undeniably. And then it ended as abruptly as it began. The intruders lay incapacitated, the room heavy with the scent of tension, sweat, and inevitability. Silence returned, but it was different now, charged with the aftermath of justice delivered not by institutions, but by those they had sought to oppress. The air trembled with the gravity of what had just occurred. What had begun as a moment of vulnerability had transformed into a testament of resilience, training, and unwavering resolve. In the quiet that followed, the question lingered like smoke in the air. How often had authority been assumed, misused, or weaponized against those who were too easily dismissed? And yet, in this singular moment, the scales had tipped. The violation had been answered, the threat neutralized, and the message unmistakably clear: power misapplied would meet force disciplined, righteous, and unyielding. The night, once oppressive, now held a strange clarity. The chaos had been resolved not through compliance, but through courage and action. And as dawn began to creep over the horizon, it carried with it a silent promise. Injustice would no longer be tolerated, and those who wielded power without conscience would one day face the consequences of underestimating the resilience of the human spirit. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting light on a home that had survived the night's chaos, scarred but resolute. The intruders had been neutralized, but the story did not end with their defeat. The real battle, the one that ran deeper than fists or fear, was against the subtle, pervasive injustices that allowed such audacity to flourish in the first place. She moved through her home with a sense of quiet reclamation, every room a reminder of what had been nearly lost. The fear that had clung to her skin like a second layer was now tempered by relief, yet it left behind a residue of awareness. Power could be wielded unfairly, and authority could be manipulated, but courage, vigilance, and integrity would always answer in kind. The neighborhood remained a study in contrasts. Behind closed doors, whispers of the night's events began to circulate. Some stared at the walls, refusing to confront the implications, while others began to question the system they had trusted. The HOA's selective enforcement and subtle prejudices were no longer abstract concerns. They had tangible consequences, witnessed firsthand. One night had exposed a fracture in the illusion of civility, revealing how easily bias and privilege could weaponize authority. Her husband, the calm sentinel throughout the ordeal, moved with measured steps, surveying both damage and opportunity. What had been a moment of fear transformed into a lesson in preparedness, resilience, and the power of disciplined response. Their experience became a testament to the fact that courage is not merely a reaction. It is a stance, a principle, and an unshakable refusal to surrender to injustice. And as the world outside resumed its rhythm, the story of that night persisted in subtle ways. A reminder that vigilance against corruption and discrimination is never optional, that the erosion of fairness begins with silence and compliance. The scars left behind were not only physical but moral and emotional, etched into memory as reminders of both fragility and strength. Ultimately, the victory was not about punishment. It was about awakening, about reclaiming agency in a space that had tried to deny it. The night had tested boundaries, exposed prejudice, and forced reckoning. And in that reckoning lay the undeniable truth. When injustice arises, it can be confronted, resisted, and corrected, not always by institutions, but by those willing to act with precision, courage, and unwavering integrity. The question lingered in the quiet aftermath, heavy and unanswerable. If authority can be so easily corrupted, how many injustices go unseen every day? And more importantly, what are we willing to do when we witness it?